Hi, this is Aaron Azrod, and welcome to the 90th episode of the Truth Island podcast. During the global pandemic, you may have found yourself locked into some rather unpleasant quarters. If you live in a tiny apartment in New York, you may have had to spend more time with people that you live with and negotiate and make compromises over common spaces. Your daily routine of traveling and going to the gym may have all been disrupted, and most people at this point in time could characterize themselves as existing in, well, not the best of circumstances. However, no matter how awful or dire a circumstance may be, the perspective or the tasks that we decide to take on can have a dramatic influence on how we interpret how our time is being spent. For example, the internet, Kindles have made essentially the sum of all human knowledge available to us, not only in our very own homes, but one need not even leave the comfort of their own bed to start learning. And yet, for many of us, we are constantly haunted by the specter of inaction. Thoughts such as, what's the point? Or, I'm just not feeling it, constantly inundate our thought stream and impair us from making the most of the resources that are currently at our disposal. Joining me to share his experience staying at a COVID hostel in Colombia, I am once again joined by Sam. Sam, you fell into a bit of a rough situation down there. Tell me, what have you been doing in your time here to combat the specter of inaction?
Well, very unexpected thing happened. I'm visiting Colombia right now. I've been here for about 4 weeks, and I'm kind of on vacation, kind of in a holding pattern, kind of in an escape route a little bit right now. But
I love
heading back,
that. I
heading
love
back to
holding
this.
pattern, right? I picture some guy in a plane. He's like, that's the worst thing is like when they keep you in the plane and you're like, when are they gonna, you're right there. Like you can see the New York skyline and you're like, when are they just gonna land the darn thing already?
Seriously, it's been like that for me. It's been a crazy year, as it has been for everyone alive on planet Earth. But for me, it's involved a lot of transitions personally, relationally, work-wise, vocation-wise, and that's kind of landed me here in South America. I'm here to kind of get away in some ways. I've also made some goals to try to learn a little bit of Spanish and just to rest and relax and to just be here in a beautiful place. And I was invited to a party in Bogota about 3 weeks ago. And in fact, it was exactly 3 weeks ago. And I probably shouldn't have gone. There's a lot of things that we probably shouldn't do. And I went, and it was at a secret location because, I suppose it's technically illegal to have a party right now anywhere. And there weren't that many people there. I would say there were 20, maybe 30 people there, but the space wasn't huge. And it was in kind of a basement type structure and not good ventilation. And people weren't wearing masks. And it was fun. And, the party went till 4 or 5 in the morning. And, I stand out as a gringo down here. I probably dress like a gringo. I look like a gringo. I talk like a gringo. So people were buying me beers and shots, and the night's going on, and it's late. And by the end of the night, I'm pretty sure I had gotten COVID.
So that no, I mean, this is very interesting, and people really need to hear this story. And this is not to shame anyone or make people feel
Yeah,
bad, but it's kind of awareness. And I think that this is also going on in New York, by the way. I've read many, the few times that I pick up the newspaper, the New York Times has become so depressing at this point. I try and avoid it, but the few times I do pick up the Times on my Kindle, I read about underground parties going on in New York, people, going to these abandoned warehouses or whatever in Brooklyn and so forth. And on one hand, I get it. You're young, you're lonely, you want to connect with other
totally.
human beings, us guys have urges sometimes. I'm just being real right now. Like I get it. Like I 100% understand that. And I understand the need for human connection is one that just can't easily be dismissed. It really, really cannot. I want to share a story that my grandma told me, living in occupied Belgium, when the Nazis took over Belgium for a period of time. She could actually not leave her house for like nearly 4 years. Okay, so when the Nazis took over Belgium, there were bombs dropped. It was chaotic. You really didn't even leave your house. Forget about wearing a mask or whatever. You just didn't leave the house, right? And that was like a reality for her. And she was born in 1920. So you're looking at a very young lady right now. You're looking at a woman that's between the ages of 18, 19, 20. Good prime years of your life. So imagine spending some really prime years of your life living, not even being allowed to leave your house at all. And okay, it's been nearly a year. I get it. I get you. I hear you. But at the same time, life like there's no guarantees in life that life is supposed to be a certain way, that you're always supposed to be able to interact and mingle with people. I mean, we think of these things as being the norm, but they're not always going to be the norm. And that's something that people just have to be aware of. Like, there are times when we have the privilege, and I'm going to use that word, capital P, or the privilege to mingle, the privilege to be social, but that need not always be the case. There have been many times in history where that privilege has been taken away, and probably for good reason.
Yeah, I mean, you're so right. And I love these historical examples. It's amazing about your grandma, for example. I think my word of wisdom, and I would want to be really, really humble about this experience and say, like, I didn't make the right decision. There was a group of 8 or 12 people from my hostel going to this party. They were all Colombian, and there was one American guy, and it was just like, it was a joyous sort of anticipation, and we went, and and we had fun, and but that doesn't the end of fun doesn't justify the means of that. And so yeah, I want to be really humble about that and contrite, and to just say, like, probably not a good choice. I know it wasn't, and I would just caution people against, as Aaron has just said, as much as you want to get out and dance and drink and all the above, just don't do it. I mean, honestly, if you avoid super spreader events like that, you're going to be, I'm not going to guarantee you're going to be okay, but that's just asking for it. And the thing is, it's also irresponsible in terms of sort of your community. And so, yeah, I just would just caution people. And I don't mean that judgmentally. I just say, hold off. It's hard. I understand where we're at right now, and it's difficult, especially in the winter months. I mean, it's pretty warm down here. I don't know how cold it is up there. It's probably pretty cold up there. So
Yeah, and I kind of want, I appreciate your humility, but I want to also just come to your defense a little bit here, Sam, because if you got 10 people telling you to do something, we all think that we're John Wayne, okay? We all think we're a hero, like, I ain't going nowhere. We all think that we're this rugged individual that's going to stand up to 10 people and say, no, 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 and it's like if we're all being honest with ourselves, if 10 people are being like, come, Sam, come on, man, we're all doing it or whatever, it's very easy to fall into that. And I don't want people to like just cast their rocks at you and just be like, come on, like, you know what? Like, before you cast any rocks or any stones right now, you try resisting 10 or 12 people that are telling you to do something. You try. And I'm being very serious. It's not an easy thing to do. Okay. It sounds a lot easier on paper. We all think that we're this heroic figure, but push comes to shove, we're not as courageous as we think to just resist people. I want to talk maybe about, now that you have like this experience, I'm wondering if we could maybe even talk about some like strategies that we could come up with to resist this kind of peer pressure for those who might find themselves in a similar situation in the future. Because I think now that we know that this is a problem, maybe there's a way that we can kind of go about this, because again, we don't want to sound, when we don't want to come off as holier than thou, because people hate holier than thou figures. They tend to not last very long. But we want to maybe come up with some language of like, how can it, like, when people are trying to tempt us to do things that we know aren't right, maybe there's a nice way to dig our feet in the sand a little bit more and maybe convince them otherwise.
Man, I'm definitely not the right person to ask about that. I'm weirdly stubborn sometimes and also a pushover sometimes. So I don't feel like I'm very balanced in this way. But I think there's a humility that's called for with something like COVID. If you want to bring your question into the context of COVID, where you're going to feel this pressure to maybe party and drink and go out and do things. I think just to be humble about it, like you're not superhuman. No one, it doesn't matter if you're American or Colombian or who you are, you're a human being with, nasal passages and lungs and a heart and cells and blood, and you will get sick,
Hmm.
you know? And so just to be really modest and humble about your humanity and I think to be humble in the sense of like just to care about other people. I just spent 10 days in isolation and that was hard, at times. Today's kind of my first day out, actually. We can talk more about that. But all week long, over the weekend, there was Thanksgiving, and Thanksgiving's not really a thing here, although Colombians love to party. So there was like a Thanksgiving thing, and I wanted to go, and I was like, no, I can't put people at risk. And they had the 1st of December is a huge deal in Colombia. I didn't know that. So there were fireworks and parties and late, and there's like lots of pretty people there and lots of, alcohol. And there was a hostel across the street from my little like isolated sort of COVID haunt where I was staying. And there was like a jacuzzi and a rooftop bar, and you could hear like girls screaming every night. And it was just like, dang it.
Oh my goodness, man. You know what this story reminds me of? This story reminds me of the Odyssey. When Odysseus is on the ship, there are these like I think like demons or water monsters called sirens, and the sirens scream out to you, and they appear as beautiful women, and they tempt the men to go there. But if you get too close to the siren, they eat you or they destroy your ship. And I think like, that's an example of where the Odyssey is still true today. And a lot of people think, oh man, that passage is just disparaging towards women. But I think if you interpret siren as like temptation to do things that you ought to not be doing, you can kind of learn a very valuable lesson from the Odyssey. I think the Greeks were really spot on with telling us that, like, sometimes you're going to be tempted by all of these allures, but you kind of need to stay on track and kind of ignore them if you want to get home safely to Ithaca. And like, again, these lessons and these things keep cropping up. I want to talk about one other thing, is that people our age also have this like notion in their head, like, oh, if you're young, you can survive it. The chances of being, 28, 29, 30 and dying from this thing are slim to none. I think one of the best talking points, one of the best things the best shields you can use against this is like, yeah, I'll probably survive this. But if I encounter someone in a more vulnerable or more elderly age demographic, they're not going to survive this, and that puts them at risk. And I think that's the best comeback, that if you ever find yourself in a peer pressure situation and people are pointing to how young you are and how healthy you are, just using that as your self-defense of being like, hey, you're right, I'll probably survive this, but I can't take that risk with other people.
Yeah, there's like definitely a rebelliousness that COVID has brought to the surface. I think we see it especially in some of the red states, about wearing masks and taking precautions. There's just a rebellious spirit against, and I've noticed it especially among people from the United States. Even down here, there's been a resistance about embracing some of these precautions. And I've been really impressed with Colombia's response. I mean, in some ways it's almost over the top, but I think that we've got to go that direction, honestly. with a global pandemic. Just a lot of their kind of basic safety things are honestly way more, even more advanced than New York City. Like I went to a restaurant the other day, and before the girl bussed the table after the customers left, she sprayed the whole thing, like all the dirt, she didn't touch anything, and before she sprayed the whole table. And I was like, boy, we didn't even do that in New York. So there's a real stringency here. And I think the mentality, I like what the point you made, like, it's not just about you, it's about the lives that your life touches. And I think I can't help but think about kind of a wartime mentality, going back to your grandma. We have to embrace kind of a wartime mentality right now. I saw somebody took a bunch of World War II posters, like victory gardens and different things that the GIs can do to promote the war effort, and people back home can do, and all these things. And it was like they took out war words and replaced them with like COVID words and stuff. And it was really clever, And
you're gonna have to send me those. I would love those posters.
Absolutely, I'll write that down.
I'm a huge history aficionado, and I would love to see some of these, World War II propaganda posters repurposed for COVID. I think that's really beautiful.
It's perfect. It's a perfect way of framing the debate. We're in a war. We're not facing Nazis. We're not facing other human enemies. We're facing sort of a biological enemy, and we have to unite as a planet, and we need to unite as a country, and we need to do our part. And I think it's just as irresponsible. I can't think of a good analogy, but if you have a 28-year-old person going out and say, well, I'm pretty resilient, I have a good immune system and stuff like that, so I'm not going to take the precautions and stuff. And I'm throwing myself under the bus here a little bit, right? Because that's what we're talking about, my experience in Colombia getting COVID. But I think that's just as irresponsible as somebody during the war doing something that actually hurt the cause of the war. You know what I mean?
Yeah, absolutely. I love the wartime analogy. I think that that's is this, I know this is much easier than World War II. I'll granted that, but I think that when you learn about the sacrifices of that generation, what's being asked of us now is just so freaking easy. It really is. It's like when you look at what they sacrificed for us, what we're being asked to sacrifice is really chump change compared to the sacrifices they made. Okay, I do want to get this story going here. So you've tested positive for COVID. Tell me what happens next in your journey.
I had symptoms pretty quickly after the party. I would say within about 2 or 3 days, I was starting to feel some of the symptoms. And I was actually staying with an American family at the time, some friends of mine who live here. And they were pretty chill about it. I was pretty open with them. I said, hey, I went to this party. I am feeling some symptoms of fever and some mild symptom like fever-like symptoms. And they were really, really calm about it, really kind. I went back to the hostel, and I have to be honest again, I probably put some people at risk during this time, because I ended up being positive. It wasn't until about a week after the party that I actually finally got tested. And I didn't know. And I was honest and open with the people around me, but I finally got tested because I was visiting another town in Colombia, a small town, with some friends, some Colombian friends. And we had spent the day together, and nothing too close, we kept our distance. We were in a car together, windows open, stuff like that. But I kind of started to put things together in my mind, some of the symptoms that I had had in the previous week. And nothing extreme. But at one point, there were within about 5 minutes, I was visiting this girl, and we were in the back seat together, about 6 feet apart. And she sprayed some perfume in her hand, and she put her hand up to my nose, and I couldn't smell it.
Mm.
And she was like, you can't smell that. And then about 5 minutes later, we passed like a hog farm or something like that, an Iowa hog farm. Just kidding. And there was like the smell of hogs, pigs. And she was like, wow, that really stinks. And I was like, I can't smell it. And she's like, oh my gosh. She was like pretty concerned at that point. And her sister's getting married in like a month. And it got me really scared. I was like, I can't, if this is a real threat, I can't be putting the whole nation of Colombia at risk here. So the next morning, I just bit the bullet, and I was kind of playing it out in my mind. I was like, well, what if I am positive? I'm going to get evicted from the hostel that I'm in. And by the way, most of the hostels, I would say I've stayed in 4 hostels since I've been here, and they've all been relatively vacant, relatively. So there's not a lot of tourists. It's a good time to hole up in a hostel is what I'm saying. Anyways, I was afraid that I was if I test positive in a foreign country, what are they going to do? Are they going to throw me? Are they going to throw me under the bus? Are they going to throw me out? Are they going to evict me? Am I going to have to be a homeless gringo in Colombia? I don't even speak Spanish. What am I going to do? I was really pretty concerned. Do I have to go back home? And but I was like, you know what? I put all that aside and I decided like, this is what I have to do. This is kind of like the right thing to do, almost morally right. Like I need to know myself, and I need to know.
I want to just throw something out here. I'm not sure exactly how this works, but I have spoken to friends who have been ejected from countries. Not that they did anything wrong. It's just they were missing a piece of paper. And usually what they'll do is they usually just look at your passport, and whatever your passport is, they book you on the next flight to your country of origin, wherever that is. So if anyone else is just, if anyone ever listens to this and they're also in a similar situation, it's like, what will happen is that you will most likely just be detained for a few days, and then you'll be sent on the cheapest or whatever the next flight back to your country of origin, and they'll even send you to your home state. They'll look at your driver's license and figure all that stuff out.
That's pretty cool. I didn't really know that. It's good to know that. I think the second, probably maybe the second, this is now maybe the scariest moment I've had in international travel. The second scariest moment was losing / getting my passport stolen in Italy in 2006.
Wow.
And just realizing that, here I am, I'm 18 years old. I don't have, a passport in a foreign country. And I was able to continue my trip. It was a trip around the world when I was 18, and I was able to finish that trip. But this was definitely up there in terms of scary.
Yeah.
So I went to the clinic, and I had such a hard time. The clinic was packed, 100 people, all masks and socially distanced. Everybody's getting tested. 80,000 Colombian pesos, which is about $30 to get tested, which is pretty good for a rapid test, getting results in 2 hours. And I'm at the front desk talking to the receptionist, and she's got a mask on and doesn't speak English, and she's got this huge glass window in front of her, and I can't understand anything. She's asking me all these questions about, like, for my forms, and all of a sudden this girl kind of popped up out of the waiting room, and she's like, speaks perfect English. She's Colombian, but she lives in LA, and that was amazing. And then, so she was kind of a hero of the day. And then I got tested, and then I waited 2 hours, and as the 2 hour mark kind of rolled in, I was like sitting in my hostel room, like kind of crouched, my head between my legs. I was just like so nervous, like, what's going to happen? What's the verdict? I'm like a guy, waiting for the jury to come back and pronounce the verdict. And it was guilty, and I was positivo. And so I kind of like just was silent, for like 10 minutes. And I'm like, all right, I got to figure this out. So I text my friends.
I love how you're making this a story of redemption in some way. I kind of, it takes a lot of humility, and I appreciate the motif you're going here with.
Thanks, man. I knew I had to be honest with everybody. I texted my friend that I had hung out with the day before, the girl with the perfume in her hand, and she was, she was pretty. I would say pretty displeased because I had put her whole family at risk, in a way. And she ended up testing negative. A couple of days later, which was great. So that I'm sure that means that everybody else is negative. But I don't know, so that was good. But it was hard. It was hard to sort of bring that kind of displeasure into people's lives. And then the next step was to go and kind of fess up, to the hostel manager. Again, no English. I go out to the lobby. He's kind of this kind of big, strong, silent type Colombian guy, but really nice. And I just spilled the beans, and through Google Translator, I said, man, can we talk privately, please? Sure. And he pulled me aside. What's going on, man? And I said, hey, I just tested positive for COVID, and I'm so sorry. And he goes, oh, tranquilo. Everybody tells me that because I'm such a like a hyperactive person sometimes. So that's Colombians' favorite things to say to me is tranquilo, just chill out. It's okay. And he was like, all right. So he asked me a bunch of questions, and basically we just decided like, you need to leave this hostel. If they get reported that you're here, they could shut us down. And I was like, at this point, I was like, oh my, it's so, oh my gosh, I'm so sorry. I've put you all at risk. I've put your livelihood at risk, And basically, the long story short is that I left that small town. I paid. I fled the town because really there wasn't space for me to have kind of an isolated space there. And so I went back to Medellin, where I started the journey and where I'm flying out in about a week. And I was able to find basically a vacant hostel. And it's, I'm a Christian, so I can see sort of like God's, hand in some of these things. It's sort of like, I'm really grateful, because I kind of found like the perfect place to spend 10 days of isolation back in this town. And, I can talk more about that, but just, it was kind of a dramatic Monday, Tuesday of last week as I was figuring some of these things out. And today I'm really grateful. I think so. Yesterday was kind of day 10 of isolation, and I'm able to kind of be a little bit more free today. And again, that doesn't mean not wearing a mask and all that stuff. It's just I don't have to be isolated as much. And I kind of double check that with some people. I checked the CDC website, and they've kind of revised some of the guidelines. And but basically, you don't have to be retested unless your physician encourages it. But 10 days, 8 to 10 days now is kind of the guideline on that. So I think I'm in the clear. I haven't got retested, and I may get retested this coming week just to confirm that. But I've just been trying to figure it out, and I've been trying to be responsible. I didn't want to end my journey, all of the above.
Well, first off, Sam, I mean, that's an incredible story, and I love, I don't want to sound too preachy here, but I love the way that you're not only telling the story as if they're a sequence of events, but you're also creating like a moral story arc of what exactly is going on to you. The verdict came in. I was able to redeem myself by finding this empty hostel, and like I can't force people to believe things they don't want to believe, but this is incredibly health. This is very helpful because there could be another person that went through the same exact set of circumstances as you, Sam, and like, oh, I randomly got this disease. It's so bad. And then I randomly stumbled upon this place, and they're not really making sense of the story arc. They're just explaining a random series of events. Like I went to this party, I got sick, and then this happened. But when you take these random series of events and you create a story arc out of them, you can actually learn from these random, from what seem like random events, you can actually make a very cohesive and cogent story arc for yourself, whether you're religious or not religious. And that's an important skill to be able to do in this world, is not just see all these events as completely unique from one another and some kind of random combination of events, but actually taking the hard work, creating a story arc, and then learning from that story arc.
Yeah, I completely agree. And I heard someone say once that, kind of the goal of becoming an emotionally mature person is knowing your story and being able to tell it in a coherent way, your own life story. As you know, Aaron, I'm a huge fan of the Pixar movie Inside Out.
Yeah.
Because and for good reason, because it actually takes really abstract ideas that you and I would love to talk about in the abstract, but it brings them into concrete relief, if you will. And I love that about that movie. It takes really complex ideas and presents them in really simple, fun ways. And one of the things it talks about is like, we all have kind of core stories, but it's not just a matter of knowing those stories. Like, when I was 10, I won this hockey game and my dad was my coach and he was really proud of me or something like that. But it's being able to sort of like connect the dots between those core stories and who we are today. And I think that's the definition of coherence, is being able to sort of see the meta narrative, the themes, the motifs of our whole life. And we don't have to subscribe to a religion to be able to do that. But I really think that is a worthwhile goal for every human.
Yeah. The final thing I want to say on this is that I find that a lot of people ascribe tragic events in their life as just sheer randomness or whatever. And okay, sometimes there are tragedies that are sheer randomness. Okay, it's true. Okay, it's true. But sometimes people like to use the randomness card to escape responsibility. And I see that a lot with people, is that they go, oh, that's just random, and they're using that because they can't come to terms with the fact that they may have gone or astray at some point in their life, and that's that kind of prevents you from growing, and it kind of prevents you from course correcting. When again, not saying there are random encounters and random things that will happen to you, and that's okay. But if you really do the hard work and create a story arc for yourself, it allows you to grow and learn and realize that the world isn't always as random as you think that it is. You do have a part to play in all this. Okay, you're in this hostel for the past 10 days. What the heck have you been doing with yourself?
Yeah. Well, I got to talk to you last week for a few minutes, which was great, and I really appreciate you reaching out to me like that. People were great. I got some really nice little text messages and emails and stuff, and we talked on the phone, and I bring that up because you said something I think really good and important, and I think it's good for everyone to hear that, like, we've got to bloom where we're planted, essentially. And we never know exactly where we're going to be planted. And that could be geographically or sort of vocationally or whatever, relationally, where we're going to end up. And I just think it's so easy to be, to fall into a trap of resentment or self-pity or bitterness. I know it is for me. And, you really encouraged me and challenged me to kind of look for purpose in this time, and to not treat, this sort of COVID hostel as one of the universe's waiting rooms, and I think that's so important. I think that's important for every stage of our lives is, we may not be where we want to be, and we may be really contained. And I think this is a word for all of us as we go into a North American winter, a North American COVID winter.
Yeah.
And that's going to be hard. It's going to be a hard winter, I think, for a lot of people. And but it doesn't have to be a waiting room. I don't know what the opposite of a waiting room is, but it doesn't have to be a waiting room, and it can have purpose, and it can have meaning. And so, like I said, I was in basically a vacant hostel. There was a guy that came every day. He's a little bit older, probably the age of my dad, honestly. He's a maintenance man. He would come for, 6-7 hours a day and paint and do maintenance jobs at this huge empty hostel. And, I kept my distance from him, but, I'd sit at the end of a table, this huge dining room table, and he would sit kind of like far away, and we'd talk, and he doesn't speak any English, but we would just somehow connect. And it actually was exactly what you said. You're like, you need to find some grandma person or old lady that, maybe she's waiting. And there were a few other kind of stragglers like that, that I was able to connect with in that way. But I also had a lot of time I worked on Spanish a little bit. I listened to, you recommended listening to a Jordan Peterson podcast. I listened to that. I read, as much as I could. I did some writing. I worked on some, my friend is a pastor in North Dakota. He sent me his sermon texts, and I would help him with his his analysis of the texts, from a distance. And I talked to some people on Zoom, and I rested. I mean, the first week I actually still had some symptoms, so I was actually pretty. I slept a lot, to be honest, and I stayed in my room as much as I could. Of course, I had to go to the grocery store a couple times. I just discovered today in the New York Times that that's actually not that risky of an activity. You wear a mask, keep your distance, get what you need to get in, get out. It's not as big of a deal maybe as we thought it was. It's still important to be careful, right? But I exercised extreme caution as much as I could. And I kept my distance, and I sort of spent time with kind of in my own thoughts. Honestly, it was kind of nice. It was kind of nice to slow down. I've been going really hard in Colombia. I've been taking buses and trains and taxis and walking and talking, and just it was really nice to just step back. It was good, and I really appreciate your advice about not settling for a waiting room.
No, thank you, Sam. I think that's a really productive usage of your time. And it actually reminds me of an episode I did a few episodes ago. We talked about the idea of punishment and justice and so forth. And in every, punishment or whatever, there's always an element of restoration or restitution. And what I like about this is that there's two ways that you could be making restitution. You're making it towards yourself by self-betterment, like I'm learning Spanish, I'm learning new skills, and you're also helping other people. You helped your friend out there look at a sermon, you proofread it for them. And hey, as a writer, if someone could proofread my stuff and I could get another set, how hard it is to get a second set of eyes to read anything that you write? It's next to impossible. No one wants to give you the time of day. It's like virtually impossible. And I think those are two really good usages of one's time. Even if you're not being punished for something, you just find yourself in isolation or locked in your house. I think self-betterment in terms of, even in my apartment, the amount of exercise I can do with a simple pull-up bar and a mat is amazing. Like, you could really get some good exercise. You could learn a second language. You could, write something. You could read books. And, in terms of communication, I always joke with people. I'm like, I'm way more social now over Zoom than I ever was in real life. Like, the conversations that we can have with cell phones and over Zoom are really incredible. And it's like, it's like to delude yourself into thinking that, oh my God, I'm a prisoner here. I'm all alone. I'm in complete isolation. There are so many communities. There's so many meetups. There's so many Facebook groups that will talk about that. You can meet people and talk to them about their problems and help them, and they can help you, and vice versa. There's so many ways that you could be contributing in this world in a positive way. And I think it's all a game of perception. If you perceive that your life is miserable, if you perceive you're a prisoner, if you perceive COVID as complete incarceration, well, you're going to adapt that mentality. But if you see COVID as an opportunity to better yourself and better others, well, it's going to be a wondrous thing.
Yeah, I forgot to mention, I also watched 8-part series on the history of the English language. YouTube is a cultural gold mine, man. And I didn't have access to, a lot of things like, I had access to some like Netflix in Spanish. So I was able to watch a few Netflix things, but, man, don't underestimate YouTube, and don't underestimate alone time. I like your prisoner metaphor too. We don't have to be prisoners. I mean, it's just this idea that we don't have to become embittered by our circumstances. It's not fated that we have to become bitter. We can become better.
And it's really my thought process is really grounded in Buddhism and Stoicism, where it's like, you can control the things you can control, but then you must accept the things that you cannot control. And that's essentially the core tenet there, is that, okay, what are the things I can't control? I can't, like, it's impossible to go to a party right now. It's far too dangerous. That is outside the realm of anyone's control right now. And accepting that is a good step forward, and then saying, okay, I have internet, I have Wi-Fi, I have computers, I have a phone, I have books, I have Zoom, I have all of these other tools at my disposal. Let me start using those tools that are at my disposal to better myself and others. And it's like, suddenly you're completely liberated. You're in a state of complete liberation once you just make that mental paradigm shift.
I think you're kind of an inspiration to me to be more, get on Zoom more, be more social, join this meetup group. And I'm looking forward to, more conversations with you about these things. And, yeah, you've been a really good example for me of kind of making the most of this time.
Oh, and believe me, I've learned from others as well. It's like we're all just passing the wisdom torch here. It's not it's not emanating just solely from me. There's a huge community of people out there. All right, final thing, Sam. You're at the end of your 10-day quarantine. What's next on the horizon?
So I actually came to a different hostel this morning. I'm actually back at my original hostel. It's kind of one of the biggest, best known hostels in Medellin. It's called Selena. They've got a beautiful co-working space. It's part of the reason I'm here. I wanted to get here in time for this podcast because I need a good internet connection, and sometimes those have been hard to come by, and quiet spaces. So this is a really, really professional kind of grade co-working space connected to my hostel. And my hostel, I just booked 7 nights for 35,000 pesos a night, which is like, oh man, that's like not like $10 a night, $10 a night. So I'm really excited. I'm going to be able to be here this weekend. I have a Zoom retreat. One of my friends is a counselor, and she recommended this. It's called a family of origin retreat. So just kind of looking at some kind of more nitty gritty technical issues with our families of origin. Our parents, our siblings. Working through some things there, and I'm looking forward to that. So that'll be the rest of today, probably starting around 4, and then all day tomorrow, and then Sunday. I'm looking forward to kind of getting out for the first time. I'm going to probably be in most of today and tomorrow because of the retreat, and then Sunday will be kind of my first day where I, again, still wearing a mask, still keeping distance, not going to super spreader events like basement parties, but also just enjoying myself. I'm going to go to some kind of spots in Colombia, in Medellin. There's a graffiti tour. Every wall and surface is covered with paint and graffiti in Medellin. It's really pretty. There's a kind of an old style Paisa Puebla, kind of an old village in the pattern of like the 1800s here in town. I'm kind of interested in maybe a museum or two, some statues, some parks, some plazas, some restaurants. I haven't really explored Medellin a lot because the southern kind of middle part where I'm at is there's so many things here. It's very touristy. There's great restaurants. There's tons to do. So I'm kind of looking forward to leaving this neighborhood, and I haven't really been able to do that because of COVID and other reasons. So I'm excited. I have about a week left after kind of starting Sunday. And I'm going to really try to make the most of it. I wish I could travel a little bit more in Colombia, but I don't think that there's time. And in some ways, sometimes less is more with international travel.
Yeah.
You probably know that as well. So I'm just trying to feel it out and looking forward to my last week here.
Awesome, awesome. And it's funny when you said $10 a day, I immediately did the math. I'm like, that's $300 a month. And I think that, I don't know about, I have the New York kind of rent mindset, and I'm like, whew, you could get a lot done for $300 a month. So I think if anyone's listening out there and they really just need a quiet place to retreat and write that novel, or just really hunker down in some solitude, with little overhead, $300 a month that's a pretty winning prospect right there. Sam, be very careful and be very safe. And thank you so much for coming on today and sharing your story.
Yeah, you're welcome. Thank you, Aaron.
This concludes the 90th episode of the Truth Island podcast. I'm Aaron Azrod.